Welcome, everybody. Okay. Again, welcome everybody to this episode of the Public Safety Drone Review. Happy to have you all here. Thank you for being here. I am on site with American Robotics for a demonstration of their Optimus infrastructure drone system at Mass Maritime Academy. So our guests today are Susan Roberts and Tim Tenney from American Robotics. Thank you both very much for being here. My partner in crime, Tim Martin, is on site also at the Texas Robotics Summit. Unfortunately, he's not with us at this time. He may come later. We never know. But let's roll along and we will get started on some of the current news stories for discussion. Before we do that, I would be remiss. I know Charles is there behind the black box screen there. Charles, you're like the man behind the glass here. But next week, we will be in Busch Gardens for the National Public Safety Drone Responders Conference. This is a great conference. Charles, is it sold out at this point?
It is sold out, oversold out. I have gotten so many people that some of the vendors didn't register like they were supposed to, and the registration went through in a much bigger scale. So we are like 550 when we were supposed to be at 500 only. So yes, we are sold out. We have gone from 300 people attending last year to 500 this year, and we've gone from 15 vendors to 62. So it's crazy.
Okay, well, we will look forward to seeing many of you there next week. And if you can't be there, we will certainly be covering it on Drone Live. Tim, you are live from Texas Robotics.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, with internet's
No
spotty
worries.
here. So, yeah, it's a great conference. Really, really busy. Huge attendance. So it's probably one of the bigger years that they've had.
Excellent. Okay, we'll look forward to hearing more about that. Let's go into some of our stories here. So first on our list is in San Francisco, and this is the issue of Prop E. Prop E is going to the ballots for San Francisco voters. Prop E would open the doors to allowing police drone use in the city, also a few other sort of technologies. San Francisco has previously been very resistant to allowing their police force to use aerial technology, drones, but this would kind of open the door. Interestingly, as we mentioned before, sort of the main selling point for this has been centered around a use case that I don't think is quite as common, which is high-speed car chases. So that's kind of an interesting way to sell it. Also, interestingly, in this article, it was pointed out that there is a lot of money behind lobbyists, several $1 million going into lobbying for Prop E. Also some money going in lobbying against Prop E on the basis of the S word surveillance. So what do we think about this, guys? Susan, Tim?
I think there's been a problem lately, right? A couple of the car manufacturers have had an issue where their cars are relatively easy to steal, right? And it's a, quick electronic issue. You can download the information on TikTok in like 15 seconds or less and understand how to steal a car. Well, maybe not me. It might take me a good minute, but these tech savvy kids are out there. These tech savvy kids are out there, and in 15 seconds, they're learning how to steal a car, and they're going joyriding, and whether that's high speed or donuts or just random, not driving very responsibly in a very overpowered car. And they are picking some of the really powerful cars, right? So my guess is that this proposition comes up in a direct response to an issue that's been in the news, et cetera, et cetera. But the issue is broader than that, right? So when you think about using drones for first responder, the first thing that comes to my mind is de-escalation, right? You put those eyes on first, and now you've got a better situational awareness of what's happening in the space. And, is somebody injured? Is that a toy gun or a real gun? Is there nobody with a gun? Just a couple of, people walking around,
100%,
right?
100%.
So I
Yeah.
think, we have a reactionary approach to everything nowadays, it feels like, and people just need to maybe take a breath and like, why would they do that? And is there a benefit?
Right.
And I think to add to that, so we do have some benchmarks in the industry, especially with police forces. If we look at Chula Vista, during my time at the FAA, they've been doing drone as a first responder before people knew what drone as a first responder was. And they focused it on safety, situational awareness, not surveillance and those things. Most of the drone first responder are for calls to service that aren't essential. So is the cat up in the tree? Well, let's go see if there's a cat up in the tree, right? And those sort of things. And they built the public trust around the program from the onset, and they've actually expanded upon that to do that. I think the big question we need to talk about is this something that's going to be in the back of every police car, like a taser is on every uniformed police officer, or should it be more, as we talked about, autonomous infrastructure that can be utilized, like a drone in a box in different areas of the city to do that? And so there's a public perception, and that's why we have lobbyists lobbying both sides of the coin. And maybe we use that high-speed car chase to kind of look over here, but not look at how we're really going to intend to use these things with the shortages of police forces that are out there, et cetera. I mean, we have those best practices and benchmarks, and that we should look to that, and California should look to that.
Boy, this is a risky effort to put a ballot measure like this up to the people to vote, because ballot measures are generally, I think no is the common practice on most ballot measures. It's like, I don't want to spend money on anything. And what they're effectively doing is they're pitting the police department against the ACLU. The two major fundraisers for this is the ACLU has put in over $200,000 to counter it and go against it, where most traditional police departments start the program, if they include the ACLU, then it's usually pretty productive conversation when you approach them and say, these are your guidelines, these are your recommendations for law enforcement use of drones. Here's our policy, and everything in our policy, it goes along in line with your recommendations. Now, it's really easy to sit across from somebody at the table and convince somebody of that, but to put it in a ballot measure for the public to decide the future of police departments, I mean, this is the city commission or city council that approved arming robots with explosives, San Francisco. So it's kind of a weird how they go from let's put explosives on robots and approve it at the city level. And the public didn't, there was outcry, but it wasn't, it was old news 2 days later. Now what they're doing is they're putting this ballot measure up to the public, who's going to read it and say, it doesn't matter what it says they're going to be used for. I would be very surprised at the success of this, putting it up.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that this really risks doing is codifying something that could really change over time and is a dynamic situation. So if you put it up to a ballot measure, you risk sort of putting something into law that you then have to retract or change over time, which is far more difficult than getting it put there in the first place. So, all right, we're tracking that one. We will see what happens.
Yeah, and vehicle pursuits is like the absolute last thing we're using drones for right now.
It was kind of an interesting thing that's where all of the materials were focused. Okay, next story is kind of a fun one, but really speaks to one of the trends that I'm seeing in the unmanned industry. So police force in Michigan, Wayne, Michigan, now introducing robotic dogs to the force. But what I'm really seeing is this kind of shift towards the integration of ground and aerial robotics. And that's certainly happening on the industrial side, where you've got like a drone deploy sort of merging data from ground robotic systems and aerial systems. And I think absolutely that could be the case with drones for public safety. So this is a SWAT team kind of a application. You've already got other, aerial drones like the Brink Lemur systems for SWAT applications. I think, when you can sort of put them together and merge those data streams, you've got a lot of great unmanned coverage there. What do you think, Tim?
Well, to go back in history, the ground robots have been around a lot longer than aerial drones. So we've been using ground robots, especially in the tactical environment, almost exclusively in the tactical environment, way before drones were introduced into it. So it's not a new concept. It's the technology that's becoming more prevalent. And when you look at the Boston Dynamics and Ghost Robotic dogs, if you will, and using them in conjunction with the drones, that's where they've really shined. You go up there, you open a door. They can literally open a door, hold it open for the drone to fly in, and be a door guard at that point. So you have your smaller platforms, the Loki Sky Hero Seguin and the Throwbot that are very traditional, tactically deployed, because they could be deployed into a bedroom, into a small area, by throwing them through a window or up onto a balcony. So you have varying degrees of ground robots, and yeah, I love to see that they're still being developed and used, because they complement each other. It's not to replace one or the other. I don't think drones were ever intended to replace ground robots. Look at their applications in bomb disposal and bomb squads. They're vital to that role.
And it's a totally different perspective, right? It offers the whole view. So you get the top-down view and you get the ground level view. And of course, the advantage of the dogs, not to be too obvious about it, is stairs, right?
Yeah.
So the dogs can navigate more complex surfaces and environments than traditional wheeled robots can.
Yeah, I think we're also seeing that robotics are starting to converge across all of the domains: air, land, marine, and even space, for that matter. But we're starting to see departments go from being drone programs to being robotics programs, because they're seeing, like in FDNY, the combination of being able to put the robot dog spot into a collapse situation where the drone may not be able to squeeze through, but then the drone being able to fly through other areas. So there's a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that police departments have really been on the forefront of adopting robotics, right? And as we look at our customer set has, really our customers are critical infrastructure, our customers are, states, government, et cetera, right? And so when they're looking to adopt, they're looking at, well, which drone system is the best for this application over on this side, and which one's the best over here? And of course, we want our drone system to be the one that gets adopted across the board and be the best fit for everything. We know that's not going to happen, right? So for us, it's about safe airspace access and a layered safety approach that says, if I can make the airspace access safe, I've got something flying around, I don't want it to fly into some kid's head, right? So, I want to be very safe and intentional about what I'm doing. We focused a lot on the safety and the safeguards that we've built into our system. And now we're, really looking at the use cases. Should we be in this use case? What's the asset optimization? How does this make economical sense for a State Department of Transportation to employ a single drone in the box as infrastructure, and then maybe lease that data out to multiple entities who need a snippet of data instead of a terabyte of data?
Yep, and I think regarding the air, ground, or autonomous systems integration, and I do believe that's where it's going, we're looking at the right tool in the toolbox. But air is a little different, right? So we're in a very highly complex regulated environment called the FAA, right? And so when we have a ground robot, there's really no regulation around it
Mhm.
unless it's local or municipal or what we bring in. So the key there is to make sure that we've got public support around that. We saw New York City tried to do this with their robot dog here about a year ago, and didn't go so well.
Yeah.
They deployed them in the streets without the public support, and they immediately, most of those were kicked over, and they removed them immediately from the streets. So public support up front and that transparency is very, very important. We've seen false starts in cities introducing robotics programs, but now I think they're learning of bringing the community in first and putting those things. But the air side, or even the ground robot side, I think we need to get away from exactly what you mentioned there, Susan, is that it's not just a police asset, it's a municipal asset. So that same dog can go do an inspection of, a landfill. The airborne drone could do a safety inspection of a bridge, but it also can do first responder service. So it could be a public aircraft operation that supports multiple entities. And with the pressures after the COVID money in the municipalities have dried up, they found that their tax revenues aren't as high as they should be. You're seeing pressures on manned aviation programs. I just read an article last couple of weeks with Los Angeles of how much they spend on manned aviation helicopters in their police departments. Every state municipality is in the same boat, if we will. And so to have alternatives, and now that we have vacancies in police departments, vacancies in municipalities with the lack of workers, that we need to be able to fill the gap and still be safe and ensure that we're promoting infrastructure and everything else around it. So I totally agree. All the robotics are starting to come together. And you mentioned the companies are getting smart because most of the components that are used to build these systems, if I pull open a robot dog or I pull open a small uncrewed aircraft system, very similar, if not the same components across the board for operating those systems. So it's good for everyone because the more that we scale, the lower the cost to the end user. So I think it's positive all the way across the board.
And to your point where you talked about the admission of the robots for the police department in New York City didn't go so well. It went wonderfully for the fire department.
Exactly. Perception is reality, right? So
well, but they also created a spot. They treated it like a Dalmatian dog. They brought it out with the kids and let everybody interact with it. So it wasn't like what you saw on the videos where it looked like these marching animals that were going to be patrolling the streets, and suddenly it became more like a scary movie.
Right. It didn't look like Judge Dredd, right? And so it looked more like a partner that's it's another citizen on the street.
Right.
It's like in police management, one of the biggest rules is control your narrative. Don't let the media come up with the narrative of how you're using the equipment or using the dog. You come up with the narrative. You invite them, you demo it, you show it before it shows up on the 5 o'clock news at the first time the public's seen it. And I think that's where some of these problems come in.
Okay, our next story is based out of Cleveland, and it kind of highlights a number of issues that are sort of critical to this community. So there's a story about a community wishing to use forfeiture funds to purchase drones. They have a problem because someone on their city board or select person or whatever their governing body is has objected to this, and that has become a proposal to again codify you can't spend forfeiture money on drones, which could cause very significant problems down the road, especially as this technology kind of evolves and becomes more prevalent and more important. So all kinds of things to talk about here. I know Tim in pre-show mentioned some things I hadn't been aware of about the use of forfeiture funds. We have a lot of issues with using forfeiture funds. One, they can be subject to the federal regulations that say that may limit the use of your the choice you have in what drones to purchase. what do we think? I mean, a lot of agencies are using forfeiture funds or are looking for creative funding sources to purchase their technology or support their fleet.
I'm super excited that the city of Cleveland wants to use drones. First
Yeah.
and foremost, I am super excited.
All except one
Um,
of them, apparently.
And I applaud them for looking around at where the source of money is. There's a real problem out there in treating drones for police forces as capital assets versus treating it as a force multiplier. Right. And so the funding mechanisms are just not working for the introduction of technology. It causes police departments to buy one-off or kind of a fast fashion technology, right? Just like my kids go into the mall and, my daughter buys something and that's going to last 2 weeks, right? And so we're not thinking about it as an infrastructure investment, and we're not thinking about it from the point of view of how does this affect the whole community. And I think that's one of the core problems of why they're looking for little snippets of money here versus putting together a holistic approach to integrating drones.
Yeah.
I
And
just want to go back to what Tim said earlier, is that and you all hit on this early, is that the orientation up front with the community is key. And that's where you're doing everything up front to do two things primarily. One is to tell what you're going to use the drone for, but also very specifically what you're not going to be using the drone for. The random surveillance is the big objection of the ACLU, and I know that Tim and I and others have worked to make sure that we follow the guidelines as much as they can with ACLU, which most of them are very reasonable. But I just wanted to make sure that people know that droneresponders.org has an outreach program in our website and our resource center that's free. Membership is free. You can go in and get that. You can customize it. It walks you through doing your elected officials, your community outreach, town hall meetings, demonstrations with Boys and Girls Clubs, to where you get a really positive interaction. Where also you have a chance to recruit people to be police officers, firefighters, and EMS people.
That's fantastic. But back to the asset forfeiture funds, I like what you mentioned right up front. There's limitations on that. So that's actually the predominant use for federal asset forfeiture fund is for counter narcotics. And it is for capital purchases only. Does not pay for training or OpEx. So when you talk about strategy from a holistic approach, we need the states and municipalities that are all part of this fund with Department of Justice is to lobby to change. We can change the outcome of that and allow OpEx and allow non-counter narcotics, because it is a big continuous fund that can support all of these needs for the municipalities, states, all the way down. And so I've seen more than one where they buy a capital drone and they don't have the money for training or all the other OpEx that goes along with it, and it collects dust and goes onto a shelf because they didn't have the holistic
Or they
approach.
train one guy, and when he's on vacation, all 5 drones are in the trunk of
It's
his
his car and you can't pull it out to use it. Exactly. So there's a lot more than just, hey, there's a pot of money over here and let's go after it.
Yeah.
And I think having the Governors Association meet to talk about how the presidential authority can change what that asset forfeiture funds are for, because it is a good asset for the country.
Yep.
And yeah, absolutely.
I think every state has a different idea of what funds could be used when using asset forfeiture. So I would definitely encourage departments to look into it and see what your rules are. I know in California we did purchase drones with asset forfeiture funds, but some states it's specifically written in their finance policy that they can't. So I think it's something to look into. It is a nice pot of money, but like you said, it is heavily restricted, and the only thing more heavily restricted in public safety than asset forfeiture is grant funds. So grant funds is a whole other animal, but it could also be that you could convince the decision makers to say, okay, instead of buying this piece of equipment in this budget that's qualified to be purchased under asset forfeiture, use the funds for asset forfeiture to buy that piece of equipment, and then we can use these funds to buy drones, because there's no restrictions on funds that are already in a city budget. Most of the police departments say, here's your budget. How you spend it through that year is the discretion of the chief of police. So there are
Right.
ways to kind of,
No, that's a great strategy. That's what Susan said exactly, because you do have budget needs for counter narcotics in every police force, and maybe you focus that on your asset forfeiture funds, and then
Yep.
you budget for your robotics and autonomous systems. Yeah.
Okay, finally, we are going to go there. We are going to the elephant in the room that we have talked about before, but Stefanik in the House has introduced the Countering CCP Drones Act, which would not allow Chinese-made drones on FCC bandwidth. Nobody's quite sure of exactly how that would impact things. There have been sort of speculation that that would effectively down all DJI drones. Others say it's not so much. At Drone Life, we've been running a series, being as sort of balanced as we can be on the topic, to talk about the issues of data security and so forth from both sides. But this would could have a pretty serious impact on people's ability to choose which drone make they use. So, like I said, we're just gonna go there. We're gonna do it and open this up and so, you know, from our perspective, we have talked to many people in the public safety community. Most are using DJI drone products. They use a variety of products. Certainly fleets are getting much more diverse, and you know, I think there's room for the discussion about the right tool for the job. Just have a variety of tools. What do you think from what you're seeing in the community and as a trainer, Tim?
yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the pressure is higher now than it's ever been. You've also got now we're talking about banning vehicles that have Chinese components in the computer of the vehicles that are able to transfer. They say are able to transfer data. So the hits just keep coming, right? This is her bill is one. There's a bunch of states that have individual bills that are going through there, and it's not just affecting public safety; it would affect industry wide. If just about everybody that has software, hardware, docks, anything that uses a DJI product would be affected by it. And I think there's arguments on both sides, and to say that there is absolutely zero threat or zero concern would be somewhat irresponsible. I think the best way to find it is not saying that there's zero threat or no concern at all. It's like, how do we get around it without banning an entire fleet of drones? You know, you look at Florida, you look at there's a very large utility company that their CEO made the decision on his own that if it's good enough for the military, good enough for Florida, it's good enough for us. And they basically grounded hundreds of drones in their fleet and had to go with a secondary market. And what they came up with was they just did it. They abandoned DJIs and they went with another maker, and they're back up operational. So, you know, but that's a small scale. We're not talking nationwide. We're not talking every police department in the country practically, and every 107 pilot that has a business that flies DJI drones would be affected by a bill like that. It's not just public safety. That one's further reaching than your typical ban on Chinese drones, because it's not just public safety. It's everything.
So we had a question come in, which I want to address right away, which is that says that at the moment the language captures DJI equipment. Is this, if this passed, would it exclude just DJI or also companies like Autel and ACSL? And I want to specify here, So the name of the act is the Countering CCP Drones Act. So it is designed to capture any Chinese-made equipment, and that's equipment manufactured really by companies based in China. ACSL, the SOTEN, is a Japanese company and actually going for NDAA compliance. They are also do have a ACSL USA entity. So just to qualify that, it would not include ACSL.
It would also be interesting to see if a ban like that goes through, what is it the whole drone, or is it just components? Because like right now you technically in NDAA compliant drones, you could use Chinese batteries. So, would it include motors and electronics, or is it just the radio transmitter?
Yeah, I mean, from just that top end language, you got to give the congressman some brilliance, whatever staffer wrote that in there, because you effectively take it all out, right? So because everything that operates on radio spectrum has to get an FCC license number on it for an OEM. So it's in your answer, the answer would be the entire drone can't be used, right? Because it operates on that spectrum.
Right.
So it doesn't matter whether it's NDA compliant or not. It's made in China.
Yeah.
It's on that spectrum. So, applause if that's what they were going for. But what about the other covered countries? Iran, Russia, North Korea, et cetera. This is the CCP Act. So what about those countries that may circumvent and, OEM manufacturers somewhere else, but their company is in Russia or Iran? There are a lot of those small UAS companies.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to our previous conversation about funding. Let's go and pretend that this is the right thing to do, right? Without a debate, if it's the right thing to do, you're putting a bunch of police departments and a bunch of businesses at jeopardy because you don't have funding to replace anything.
Exactly.
Right? And so, if I'm looking at the microwave sitting on my counter at home today, and I'm like, well, I can't use it anymore. It's got some Chinese parts in it.
That's right.
Somebody should send me a check to help me buy a
Agreed.
new microwave.
And we've
right?
got precedents for that, right?
Yeah.
Look at COVID. We gave out a lot of COVID money for businesses to keep workers working and incentivize economy to keep going. In the FAA, we do that all the time. Let's look at ADS-B. When I was in the building, we had ADS-B that was getting levied on general aviation aircraft.
Right.
And first thing out was you're going to spend more money on an ADS-B box that costs more than my Cessna 152.
Right.
So the government incentivized the adoption. Early adopters got a big check to adopt early, and then that check slowly went down to make sure everybody would go on the other side until the rule was in effect. But we paid for it. And it was the right thing to do because we're making you do something else, right?
Right.
So, and we talked about asset forfeiture funds. Maybe we take some of those funds to transfer the DGI for all the municipal police forces. These funds can now be used for OpEx purchases, for training, for switching over your fleets, and put that into the bill. So maybe the police associations and associations go and say, maybe we don't dislike your bill, but add this to it before it becomes law.
Right.
So we have
Oh, go ahead. I was going to go over the questions, but go ahead.
then that's what I was going to do too.
Yeah.
Go for it, Tim.
So what the question, it's a great question. Has there been any talk about the government providing grant money to replace large fleets of DJI drones for public safety agencies? And the short answer to that is no, federally, but you look at what Florida did on the state level, and Florida did offer or is offering money to those agencies to replace the fleets. I don't know how that works. I don't know if it's worth anything or if it's hard to access that money, but that's the benefit of this being done at the state level, is that you have a lot more cooperation between the agencies and the government that banned it to help them get back on their feet, because they recognize that drones are critical and vital to operations, but they're not necessarily. But at the federal level, they could pass a law like this and say, I don't know, you guys are on your own. Good luck. They don't necessarily have that intimate connection to their agencies that are within their state.
Right.
And I think also to respond to another question is that, what we are seeing is preferred, if these bans are going to go through, is that there's a combination of some replacement funding and a phased approach. So also that it's not hard stop on X date, everything goes down, because that's a very hard to deal with. Whereas if you have a period of time to simply retire obsolete technology and replace it with something different, that creates less of a hardship.
And I mean, but we can't downplay cybersecurity is something we need to focus on in our drone fleets, right?
Yep.
Because we are moving massive amounts of data that could be, if used in the wrong hands, and in nefarious ways. And so I think it's really important for us to work together to focus on how are we going to get to that phased approach. No, let's look at the infrastructure bill and the funds that are in there. I mean, that's a reoccurring, reauthorizing act that has a lot of assets and resources in it that could also be helpful.
Yeah.
But from a cybersecurity standpoint, you know, I know the police officer on the street wants that streaming video, or I want that infrastructure inspection, but we've got to be cognizant of that because the standards are coming. Small UAS and the FAA and DOT realm are going to have, you know, cybersecurity standards just like we have in a commercial aircraft. So, but you're exactly right. We got to provide the funds because everybody's trying to do the right thing, but we only have so many resources.
Right.
I just want to add one last thing to that. I think when you talk about the funding, what's really important, I'll make this short, is that they've got to make sure that they get the correct funding. You can't just pick some arbitrary number. I think that if there's going to be a requirement that you ban something, that you figure out by doing a poll of how much it's going to cost to recover what's been taken away, because it's not just a drone, it's the payloads, it's the software, it's the solutions, it's the batteries. There's a lot more goes into it. People pick arbitrary numbers and it doesn't cover the bases.
Yep.
Absolutely right, Chief.
Yep, good.
Chief is raising the next generation of pilots back there, so we're we're good with happy noises. All right, moving on to our guests with us today. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I am Miriam McNabb with Drone Life, and I'm currently live at Mass Maritime Academy, where this morning we had a demonstration of the Optimus drone system. The Optimus drone system is put out by American Robotics. They are also a Massachusetts-based company. Right now, Optimus is kind of the heritage of Optimus was originally back in the day was the Aerobotics system, also purchased by American Robotics in 2022. And what we're talking about here is really different. We have spoken before actually on this webcast with Eric Brock of Ondas Holdings about the deployment of the Optimus systems in the city of Dubai as first response systems and drone as first responder, if you will. But what we're talking about today is a little bit of a paradigm shift on that. If instead of talking about them specifically for first response, is the idea of having these drone in a box systems deployed throughout a community, whether that's a municipality or a state, for the use of all stakeholders in that municipality. So for example, if we had them every couple of miles or, you know, at the appropriate radius for the environment, and you got a 911 call, you send it up for police. If you have a fire call, you send it up for fire. But additionally, if the local public school needs their roof inspected once a year, you can also use it for that. And that's a way of sort of leveraging the data provided by these systems to multiple stakeholders, funding it differently. It doesn't put it all on the police, but makes it more sort of part of the city infrastructure in the same way that buildings and roads and public bathrooms and libraries and so forth are part of the infrastructure. So with that being said, you know, Susan, when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned that this is really designed for a flexible environment. This is from rural to very urban, very complex environment.
Yeah. Nobody thinks of a drone in box as a flexible environment because you sit it down somewhere and then you operate out of it, right? But what we've designed is a system that's type certified to be airworthy, air safe, right? And then we have the layered approach of safety. So you have your detect and avoid, radar system, and you have your system that senses the other airplanes that are out there electronically, and then you have an operations center that tells you everything that's going on. And we've put this all together along with the drone in the box. And what you can do is literally, like, you fly into Logan, you should be able to look out your plane as you're landing and see the drone on the next runway over while you're landing. And that drone should be able to be doing the runway inspection so that you can get more throughput in your airport, so you don't have airport delays. And then as you leave the airport, you should be able to watch it, scanning buildings for any kind of cracks or, things that civil engineers care about on buildings. And then maybe as you're going down the road, there's another drone, our drone preferably, who's looking at the Department of Transportation issues on potholes and traffic management and things like that, right? So the idea that these drones will be ubiquitous, like a library is ubiquitous in your neighborhood, right? And that they are simply part of the electronic infrastructure, like a street light, and what that can do for you, as opposed to saying drones are bad, they have cameras, or I don't want them near me. Well, why don't people want them? I don't like them because they're loud sometimes. They don't like them because they have cameras. Well, okay, all that data is public data. If it's operated by your state Department of Transportation, that data is public. Now, we're gonna have to go back to the cybersecurity question that we just talked about, like how public,
Right,
right?
right.
But if it's part of your infrastructure, and it's going to be part of your infrastructure, that day is coming. How do we want to responsibly make it part of your infrastructure? How do we make it so your state isn't spending for an asset that's not being used, right? Because, we've intentionally built a drone that can fly 24/7. After it flies, it comes back, it changes out its battery, it changes out its payload, it's back up in the air in 2 minutes. So effectively 24/7, right? If there's not enough use cases, if we're deployed in an area that doesn't use it, or only one customer is using it, well, then maybe there's an argument that says, well, that's overkill, you don't need it, right? That would be a shame and a waste for the state to pay for something like that.
That's right. And I mean, it's a paradigm shift in the whole municipality, right? So a fire department wants its assets, its crash axes, its suits, its training, and it wants its own drone, right? It doesn't necessarily need its own drone. And there's training costs that go along with that as well. It needs a drone to get on site to make sure it's safe for the firefighter to go into the building. And if there's people in the building that it needs to respond to and evacuate. The police, it's not a police car. So, that can't be used anywhere else. It's the municipal car that you can sign out and say, hey, I need it from 2 to 3 to do an inspection of infrastructure. And oh, by the way, 911 dispatch center is going to do a call of service because there's a cat up in a tree. And I want to send that out to verify the cat up in the tree. Or that police chase that we talked about, right? So could possibly do that as well. And back into the box, downloading the data, because I'm going to say the bad word, nobody wants a drone. They all want automated data solutions.
Right.
It happens that our drones and robots bring that data automated to the user, that's streaming live data for a police force, for evidence, or for situation awareness. That is infrastructure inspection, LiDAR data, orthographic maps that are there for elevation, railroad inspection data, multi-use. So now we're making a force extender and force multiplier for strapped municipalities. Because remember, there's not a municipality we can't throw a rock at that is in need of efficiency, increasing safety, et cetera.
Right.
But we got to get beyond that. It's the paradigm shift. It's my thing. It's my asset.
That's
When
right.
this asset can serve all of those needs, but you got to let the proof happen.
Yep.
And if you need more, instead of 5 boxes, you may need 6 because of how many calls of service in a 24-hour period you need, et cetera, et cetera. But do you need one in the back of every trunk?
Yeah.
Do you need one at every fire station?
Right.
Most likely not.
Yeah, and we're really lucky, right? So we're here in Massachusetts. We're working with the Department of Transportation Aeronautical Division with Administrator DeCarlo and Chris Ubelhart and team, and Chris Bailey. Sorry, Scott Ubelhart and Chris Bailey. And we've got 7 use cases that we did this morning, right?
Within a 2-mile range.
In a 2-mile range, right? And we're talking to some entities who came to the demo and were like, wow, that's That's cool. We could do blah, 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 blah. And it's no lack of use cases, right? Now, if we added all that up, that's probably a good 3 weeks worth of work, right? But that's one customer, right? So now when we add that up again with the next set of people who are coming for the demos tomorrow and the next set of people who come for the demos, now we start talking to the Department of Transportation about create the proverbial drone library, have the asset available to share, let people know where it's at, help the people understand how to get their library card and check out the service and get that data. And let's get it built into the system so it's ubiquitous and kind of boring and commonplace.
And so I want to talk about two things there. I mean, first of all, the thing that first comes to my mind is seasonality. So it's hard actually here on the Cape for some of the communities who really could use the drones for more maritime applications. That is very seasonal here in New England. You know, so you got to justify that purchase if you're treating it as by a specific drone. But I do want to specify something unique about the Optimus system. So the Optimus system is a drone in a box, but it is much larger than the standard drone in a box that you see, that you've seen at other shows. And the reason for that is that it holds 9 different payloads, correct? And 10 batteries and 9 different payloads. Those payloads can be swapped out by a robotic arm. You can have your operations center completely remote from your actual installation. And so I want to talk about those payloads because some of the applications that I've been hearing just from the floor out here at the demo, it was everything from search and rescue, mosquito control to you know, many of the maritime applications. Here we are right on the ocean here at Mass Maritime Academy, counting seagulls to tracking shark incursions, because that's a thing on Cape Cod now. But so let's talk about some of those payloads. You know, today we had the worst possible weather. It's rainy and foggy outside, but if you'd had the LiDAR payload on, you could have easily seen through the cloud. So describe some of those payloads, because otherwise it's not really you hate to say sort of a universal tool, but it is those 9 different payloads that make the breadth of applications.
Absolutely. Yep. So we talk about like shark watching. So if we put a thermal payload on the drone, and if the weather was misty and rainy, that would not affect the mission whatsoever. I would still be able to see the shadows of the sharks or whale watching, seals, maritime activities. I may not be able to get that infrastructure inspection of the top of the bridge that's 300 feet in the cloud, because I have to avoid that for FAA regulations. But when the weather gets better, that's after I swap a battery, I'll swap the payload back for that high resolution global shutter camera that'll go up and do that inspection later in the day. It may not happen at 9 a.m., may happen at 11. But that's the same if we had human inspectors that had to put their OSHA gear on and go into a bucket truck. It wouldn't be safe for them to do that as well. And but the drone isn't idle, whereas the people in the bucket truck are, because they're assigned to go look at that bridge inspection, whereas the drone is doing 7 other things. And maybe from there we go and look at a LiDAR mission for the ballast conditions of the rail track that Massachusetts is in charge of. So there's no limit. Perimeter security, all of those.
And those guys who used to work in a bucket are now working in a really nice heated room, probably more heat than I'm experiencing today. But they're in a nice room and they're looking at their computer screen and they're looking at the same picture. So they have the same job essentially of looking at the data, right? They're just in a nicer environment. And, you know, our system is, it houses its own air conditioner and heater, because we've operated in 120 plus degree for the last 430, I'll get corrected by my guys. My engineers will say 430 plus days, so I won't give them a precise date. And we've also operated at, 10 below 0. So, the system can range and do remarkable things. And the drone, yes, of course, there is a difference in performance when it's, negative 10 degrees outside, but the drone is still flying, right?
That's right. And it's enabling those autonomous operations with beyond visual line of sight. So, and this past week, we've operated under a waiver with a very unique, true beyond visual line of sight, no shielded operations, no visual observer on site, to be able to prove that these systems can operate autonomously when you work with the FAA and meet the regulation where it's at and have the right systems in place. And that active passive radar with an integrated UTM did the job for us of replacing those visual eyeballs of an observer.
Right.
And I just want to add to the payloads. For example, DFR now is transitioning to being able to deliver defibrillators out in the scene to drop Narcan, as well as in New York City, they're looking, as well as some of the places in Florida, at being able to drop flotation devices. A lot of that going on in Australia, up and down the coast, which can make life-saving much quicker and much safer.
Yeah, and we've done that. We've dropped AEDs, we've dropped EpiPens, we've got a very, very small life preserver that fits in our payload. In fact, it's interesting because our payloads are in a, I'll call it a cartridge, right? We've integrated all of our payloads into an adaptable system so that as long as the payload fits in that cartridge, we're good to go. It makes it very, very easy to modify and put a new payload in. So when we want to do something like, oh, here's a brand new AED device, does it fit here? Does it not change the CG of the drone? Then we are good to go, and it's a relatively easy thing for us to adopt. So as use cases get identified of what do people need, whether it be an EpiPen or a Narcan pin or whatever, that's something that's very, very easy to get. We have a customer in the Middle East who has operationalized their city with drones, and they've reduced their response time for emergency calls from 15 minutes to 1 minute, which is phenomenal, right? So they get eyes on the scene, it's a car accident, they can tell, yes, there's injuries. Yes, it looks like critical injuries. Yes, somebody's having an allergic reaction. Here's the EpiPen, right? Long before the police or other first responders can make it through traffic to get to the person, right? So it's been phenomenal as far as changing the safety of that city, and it's been very, very well received.
And I think when we talk about this shared infrastructure, I think that there's one thing that kind of comes to mind, which is an article I published just a couple weeks ago about a public safety team, right? Fire, is it Beverly Hills? It's somewhere in California. With the fire and the police sort of joining forces for their drone program, right? So you're sharing drones, pilots training, et cetera, between public safety agencies. So just adding kind of, yeah, it's public safety agencies and the Department of Transportation to check out the potholes in the road situation, the traffic and the whatever. It does kind of make sense, especially when you think of those models as they are kind of evolving here in the United States, right? It's not what you put together.
My little hometown of East Grand Rapids, every police officer is also a fire person, is also a EMT, right? And because they have a very small
Not a lot of
department, right? So it doesn't matter if they roll up in a police car or a fire truck or an ambulance. When they roll up, they kind of know what they're doing in any situation. And of course you want the police officer to go to the police situation and vice versa. But, you know, if the police officer gets there first, they can do what they need to do for the other services. It's the same exact approach. It saves an enormous amount of money in that little town budget.
Right.
And builds teamwork and builds that trust between the different agencies as well.
Right.
And that concept is starting to expand a lot more because fire departments are able to do a lot more than police departments in those cities that have concerns. So a lot of fire departments are excelling, and then you have some communities where the fire departments are doing absolutely nothing, and the police department's doing everything. You know, when I first started my drone program in 2018, one of the big premises for us is what you mentioned was payload deliveries of flotation devices.
Right.
And that is a concept that our lifeguards and fire department never really bought into. They're like, we can get out there faster, we can manage it. Well, now we're actually making progress in those flotation devices. So we're
one of the use cases, one of our demo personnel that brought up from the U.S. Coast Guard was, now that you have wind farms that are out into the ocean, when a worker falls between the wind turbines, they can't get a manned helicopter in there because it's too tight. So to have our system, the Optimus, go drop a flotation device until they can get a boat out there to go and pick up the survivor, would be a force multiplier for them, because that is a use case that they never thought they would have with their search and rescue helicopters, but it's there
Right.
and it's happening.
Right.
Yeah, we're here at the conference. We're partnering with New York Fire Department to do a training exercise delivering a rest tube flotation device out in the quarry, and it's polling the students that are here, the attendees. It's not an exercise or a concept that is widely used right now. So we're hoping to get that concept out there, that delivering these devices, like you said, it can't, not just flotation devices, but EpiPens, AEDs, the things that could get to people faster, whether it's police or fire making delivery, doesn't matter. It's the whole concept of going and, you know, police officers went from wearing guns to wearing tourniquets, and then wearing Narcan pouches and AEDs in every patrol car. It's the landscape has completely changed in how we deliver services to the community. So that's great that you guys have all of those and considering all of those as possibilities.
And I think it would be great if we had some development on universal ways to attach to be drone agnostic, so that the payloads can be much more usable regardless of the drone you're using.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir. Would agree with the OEMs of payload to
Yeah.
drone integration. I mean, in aviation, that's pretty standard. We have the same connectors, whether it's an Airbus or a Boeing or a Textron aircraft. But I think those standards are coming.
Yeah.
And ASTM, RTCA, those standards organizations are working with industry partners to start doing that. And I think you're seeing that calculus come together here in the next year or two.
Yeah.
We definitely need to talk.
I think too that the other sort of element that comes up here is the issue not only of flexibility for having, you know, multiple payloads. Of course, if you are a smaller department, you aren't going to be able to stock a payload for every single job. If you may have an application that only comes up twice a year, you can't actually equip for that. So that's an aspect, but also kind of future-proofing your program, sort of future-proofing, because these applications are evolving really rapidly. I mean, who was carrying Narcan pens 10 years ago? Like, you know,
Right.
I don't know, maybe you were, Tim, you can tell me, but
No, definitely not. You know, and like I think you said it, Tim, you said it is what these if more drone manufacturers, the OEMs, they would release their new drones with a payload drop system incorporated in the drone, so it's a button on the remote. It would thrust us into that world of deliveries a lot quicker.
That's a really hard one, right?
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is. I don't know.
Very little drones out there that can't support a payload at all. They just don't have the weight to do deliveries, right? Some of the drone manufacturers who are into deliveries have focused not only on the safety of their drone, and they've done it very well, but they've, you know, how does the drone get to a landing zone? How does somebody put something in the payload, right? So there's this whole chain and workflow that has to work out. And right now the industry has been populated by a lot of very small companies, a few big companies, and, you know, in a lot of cases, they're all chasing either the same customer or very similar customer, right? And so we're seeing a lot of, as Bain Capital would call it, creative destruction in the marketplace. But I think you're right. We will get there. It will become like, you know, what's a car without a trunk? Well, it's a car that can't go to the grocery store, right?
That's right.
So I'm sure we're gonna get there.
Yep. I mean, it's just exactly right. I mean, if you look back in the early days of cargo aircraft, we were strapping anything, any way we could. Now everything uses an ISO container, whether it's on a FedEx aircraft, a military transport, or a smaller Textron aircraft, feeder aircraft with a turboprop and a 463L pallet.
Right.
Everybody's using that, and no company will buy your services if you don't have it, because that's how logistics moves. I think we're not there yet, but we're getting there, because we've had thousands of UAS drone companies, right? And those companies are consolidating, scaling, and starting to build the right leadership, the right products and services, and mature, because the day is coming when everybody, not just the Optimus, will require a type certification to be able to fly into the air. And I think your ground robots are going to require some certifications that are going to come around it as well. Who knows? Maybe it's a federal highway or commercial trucking, PHMSA or SIMSA, that's going to create those standards. But industry needs them. You just mentioned it. You're tired of buying one drone and you can't use that payload on your other drone.
Right.
And you only need it on Mondays, but not Fridays, right?
Right.
And we know one of the largest costs in a drone is the payload, right? And there are some expensive payloads out there. So yeah.
We are kings at adaptation. We could just we figure it out, and we will continue to figure it out. So, but it'd be nice to have it made easy for us.
Yep. All right, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you very much to my guests from American Robotics. We hope to see many of you next week at Busch Gardens, and we will certainly see you here on the first Tuesday of next month. Thanks, everybody.
And this is recorded and will be on the Drone Life YouTube channel.
Yes, the recording will be on Drone Life TV. That's our Drone Life YouTube channel. Thank you.